Hello.
Hi.
That's me starting. Good start, I think. I don't know what episode we're on.
Well, we missed a week.
We missed a week, yeah. We missed a week. Why did we miss a week? We missed a week because we had friends staying.
Yes.
And it just got a little pressure to find the time to sit down and talk for a couple of hours. But it was a lovely week.
It was.
And one of the high points of the week was travelling over to the nearby island of Caldey. We live on the Welsh coast, and across the bay, is an island which is inhabited entirely by...
Well, not entirely.
Okay, I was going to say entirely by monks, but no, there are support people
lay
over
people.
there, lay people who say, but the island is basically owned and ran by a troop, a murmuration of monks.
That's a good one. Murmuration of monks.
Or a murder of monks. I don't know what the collective. What's the collective term for monks? Not a murmuration.
Monks. I don't know.
A mugging of monks. I don't know. So anyway, there's a gathering of monks over there. There's about 18 of them, and they're Cistercians or Trappists. Same, synonymous as I understand it. And so the monastery is over there, but this island's incredible because it's been inhabited by monks since Celtic times. Mm. So the first recorded information we have about it was like the 6th century, so like the 500s. There was Celtic monks over there. And right now, as I said, there's about 18 monks.
Yeah, it's quite a smaller number now. Nowadays, it has been many more, but yeah. There's a big abbey there.
There is a big abbey. It's disproportionately big given how many are actually there.
And I think 3 churches beyond the abbey that are available to the public to go and sort of visit on certain days.
Right. So as the public, you can go mostly in the summer. They run boats every 20 minutes, little boats, like a 20-minute ride across from the beach over to the island. And a tiny little island, really. And but it was really beautiful. It was a gorgeous day when we went over there, and we're all kind of pilgrims, so it was sort of non-denominational pilgrims. Mm-hmm. Because that's what we want to talk about a bit today, which is the one of the high point actually of the island for me anyway, and I think for you
definitely
and our friend
agree
too. Was so you have the big church, or is it an abbey? Is that what they call it, or is it just a big church? No,
it was a church that's the main church that the abbey uses,
which is like an 18th or 19th century church, right? It's not that old. It's a few hundred years old.
Yeah, it's newer, and it's the one that's actively used by the monks to say their prayers. And you can go and watch.
And we did.
We
went
in the gallery.
Sat in the gallery and watched them do their morning or afternoon prayers. And there's a few of them anyway. It's quite funny to watch them actually, because there was a skinny young guy there. They've all got their white robes with a black scapulum, I think they call it, scapula, which is like a apron kind of thing back and front that sits over the top. So they're white with black on top. And so I was just sort of taking note. There's about half a dozen there, and they're up against the sides of the wall of the church here on this end, and it's the liturgy. They're speaking the prayers that they speak
and singing as well.
Oh, they sang, did they?
They did at the beginning when we arrived. They were singing, and it was really beautiful actually.
Yeah, and so they were there, but I was sort of taking note of who was there. It was about half a dozen, and I think there was a lay guy who was visiting as well.
Which you can go and stay as a male, obviously.
Yeah. And actually on the website, if you go to the website, they're like, want to become a monk? And you can go, and if you're or sort of a single Catholic, you can go and join them.
Yeah.
But there was this sort of skinny young guy who looked to be like in his 30s, maybe 40s, but and some other different shapes and sizes. But there was just like a really old guy, and he was just barely, holding himself up on the pew that was to the side. I don't know if you noticed him.
Yeah,
He was just sort of balancing. They're in and out of that, church doing their, liturgical prayers and whatnot, day in, day out,
multiple times a day.
Yeah, exactly. It's living the contemplative monastic life. So it was beautiful to witness. And then we walked up the road a little bit and to the older part, and there was a church.
Not the oldest church, but one of the oldest churches.
Okay, but this dates back to the 6th century.
Yeah.
And the church was, I think, built. This one was built in Norman times, but on the foundations that were reported years, from the 500s in the Celtic times. But immediately entering that church, spiritual power there,
strong
really just grabbed you.
Yeah, we sat down. What I guess individually we probably imagined would be for a few minutes, and I don't know how long we were in there.
We were in there a while.
But
in
it's
the end. Palpable silence, energy, presence.
Very strong. And it's not, I've certainly experienced that before in places.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
It was very strong.
It's not everywhere. And that's
right. The essence of that I find to be everywhere.
Right, true.
But the strength of that is not everywhere.
We have these places in the world and people who have a kind of an amplified version of that. Yeah. The volume of that presence, that energetic, divine presence, whatever we want to call it. Shakti in maybe in Hindu terms, but just the presence of the energetic energy. Presence of the divine energy.
Yeah, and we've experienced it throughout our lives in different scenarios and different cases, and you can feel it when groups of people gather, but you can also feel it in places and buildings and even, that it's the same energy that is felt in deep meditation as well.
Yeah.
So it's not other than, it is, I would argue, our divine nature is of that presence.
Yeah.
But it can be, you can go places and you can be around people and you can be around groups, even groups of meditators, and feel that.
Well,
strongly.
This is it. So I think this is a way into a conversation that we wanted to have about presence. Mm-hmm. What we would call presence, or in other terms you might call it darshan. In terms of people in the East, it's quite it's commonly understood that the very presence of a sage, of an awakened being, has a living presence of that, and it's palpable. You can sense it. Now, not everyone can sense it. Not everyone's sensitive to it.
And I would argue that energy, we are all that energy. We all have that presence, but it is often can be veiled or covered over or unseen. And so you wouldn't necessarily, if you are sensitive to that kind of thing, you wouldn't necessarily notice it in everyone.
No.
Yet it is there at the heart of existence in everyone.
Yeah, you could say the awakened have uncovered it, and it
unveiled.
Is the bushel. The light has been the bushel has been removed from the light.
Yes.
And that's actually quite. I hadn't thought of that before. Really, what is it? Don't keep your light under a bushel. And actually, that's the nature of the veiling quality of we are the light, and so it gets veiled by the bushel of egoic structures, beliefs,
concepts, ideas, conditioning.
So, no, but it was interesting. So, when I do hit on it, when we do kind of find ourselves in a place, and you're in one, holy place, and it's beautiful and it's nice, and then you go into another place and go, ooh, this has something.
Yeah.
I remember, I think the last time I had Well, the last time I had that experience in Britain was Glastonbury, I think. I mean, we'd been...
Actually,
Go on.
we went to that. I don't know if you agree with me, and maybe not to the strength of the little church. It was St David's Church. It's called on Caldey Island, and also maybe not to the strength of Glastonbury. But I remember us going to Evensong in Hereford.
Oh,
and
that
that
was beautiful,
little
yeah.
tiny chapel.
Oh, yeah, the chapel.
There was
That
so it's not the
strong.
main
Yeah.
cathedral there.
There's like a
tiny little
a prayer chapel
yeah.
thing just off to the side of the main building,
Yeah,
the main building.
That also for me was strong.
Yeah, that was
So that's
yeah,
probably
right.
the last time for me in this country, at least.
Yeah, yeah.
But of course, Turkey. We went to Turkey last year.
Oh yeah, went to Mother Mary's
house, supposed house,
near
and
Ephesus.
The energy there has stayed with me to this day. Actually, the living memory of that in my physicality has not left. That was probably the most powerful experience for me in terms of a place and the presence of a place. And actually, we've been many places that have had a very strong presence to them as places.
Yeah. Well, yeah, definitely. So there's a long history of this, and it's funny when I think back to my own spiritual path, how it unfolded. If I was asked to sort of describe what the sort of proximal causes, of my own sort of spiritual growth and awakening, it was definitely years of meditation. Mm-hmm. And then several years of satsang and self-inquiry, and then spiritual transmission really kind of sealed the deal towards the end there. And so those seem to be the particularly the meditation and the self-inquiry and study to some degree. It's important to
that's always been part
reflection,
of your,
definitely,
your path.
So the path of study, reflection, and meditation. These are the sort of some of the pillars of what it takes. But after I looked back, because the final sort of, let's say, I would say the final, but final in quotes, but the big pushover into the abiding experience of non-duality
cherry
for
on
me,
top, or the last straw that broke the camel's back.
Well, yeah, exactly. The one that pushed me off the cliff, and I'm still free falling. That's how I've put it before. Was an energetic transmission, which we both now, offer and use with the people that we, who have sessions and groups and whatnot. So transmission was the final piece. But when I look back, it was there all along.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I certainly see that now, but didn't see it for years. Yeah. Even once we were giving transmissions, I still didn't quite. No. Early days anyway, didn't quite make those connections that I would now, going, this has really been part of my life, your life, our life for forever.
And it's a mystical part of it because right, if someone says a woo part of it, whatever, because it's so, I
would have been one of those people that would say this is woo.
It's non-material, but the experience of my life has been so clear. That so many key parts of my path and my experience has been driven by the actual sensing of a spiritual presence.
Yes, and it's not a thought process or an imagination of wanting to know a presence. It's literally a felt.
Yeah. And often it's in people. It was in people. Like now, I've been to India a couple of times. You've been into India too. When you get around, if you're fortunate enough to sort of actually get around someone as well who's a yogi or someone who's spiritually awakened in that context. I went to visit the Shankaracharya of India, of the South back in the 90s, and that was so strong. Like I was aware of these presences and what that quality was, but it still kind of caught me by surprise when I sat with him, with a few of us. We had a small group, sat with him for a while, and then went off, and it was a trip. It was just suddenly everything was bliss, made out of bliss. I remember sitting there eating, we all went for a meal afterwards, and we sat, and I was just blissed out, completely blissed out. And I was eating these little, these milk sweets, burfi or whatever I was eating. And I go, this is made of bliss. Looking at people, you're made of it. Just completely, that darshan with that particular sage down in South India was so powerful. And it was one of the early times where I'd actually had that experience in a person. Now, before I'd had it in groups of meditators, just the radiant presence of that.
I'd had it through videos as well, through watching
Maharshi,
Maharshi giving. We didn't call it satsang; they called it knowledge meetings, but it was satsang. So videos that were recorded in the 70s, 80s, 60s, whatever, and there was a palpable energy. Of course, it wasn't spoken about, although it was spoken about directly, but not in the terms that we now talk about here today. Yeah. But it was spoken, it was acknowledged that you might be listening to a video, and like I would do at school, and the mind quietens down and actually you want to fall asleep. It everything sort of slows right down and softens. There's a softening effect of presence. To me, I would describe that when you feel that pull of presence in the environment, whether that be through groups of meditators or through a video or through sitting with a sage, for me everything softens and sort of there's this pull into the depths of silence.
Exactly. And same thing.
Which is bliss. At the bottom, it feels blissful, very blissful, but it's like the start of that is this softening, this opening up, the deepening into silence.
Well, Ramana Maharshi spoke about it. How do you know a true guru or true teacher? He would say you feel it around them. It's palpable. There's a quietness. The mind quiets down, and a sense of peaceful presence around them. And so I didn't even know I was noticing that for years.
Yeah, because
I did know, but I didn't know the importance
exactly,
of it.
And you might not understand it in terms of energetics that we would speak about now. It's like the energetics of presence, the Shakti energy of it.
It's like the difference between a light coming through a muddy window and then you clear off the window and the light comes through strong. Like the light was always there.
Yeah, but
if your physiology...
Yes, exactly. You wouldn't necessarily attribute it, notice it. I remember, when we were living at the ashram, like there were people who really, when you say, presence of either the group or the teacher or whatever, they would be like, no, I don't know. No. I don't feel that.
It wasn't conscious anyway. Either they weren't sensitive to it or they weren't conscious of it.
Yeah.
But, I remember it way back when I was in the TM movement, and I used to get yagyas, which are, for those who don't know, they're basically ritual performances by Vedic pundits who make offerings into the fire of Agni. They'll chant the Vedic chants appropriate, and they'll make offerings to the fire, and it all seems rather esoteric, but this stuff's been going on for thousands of years. And what I found incredible was that so it's happening thousands of miles away, and you go, well, the ag is going to be held from like 10 a.m. to 12 and then and next day, whatever. Tell you the time. But I knew it. I knew when it was happening. I could just feel myself go into that, settled, energetic presence, absorption. I could feel myself, and I used to say it felt like being meditated.
Yes, that's exactly. And actually, the incredible thing for me is I remember you once got me a yagya. This was early days in our relationship, but you didn't know, or you didn't tell me at least what time the yagya was going to be performed. So you say it's going to be from this time, but at this time I didn't know that, and yet it was a week-long yagya at the same time every day. That feeling of being deeply meditated.
Yes.
came over me. And it is a coming over you. It's a wash. And I've, even now, I get people who I'm giving a remote transmission to, and they've reported the same thing.
Yeah.
And they maybe even wake up in the middle of the night feeling that even. So it's definitely a thing.
It's a thing. It's a question of whether one is sensitive to it, because it's always there. And I suppose the perception of it is something to do with your own, like encrustment, let's say, of veiling, influences, conditionings and stuff. And so why does an awakened being kind of seem to embody it and radiate it more? Because the veils have been destroyed, the veils have been uncovered, and so the light is there to shine. But we all have it it's in the heart of all.
And so to get back to the Caldey thing, and just generally places that we've visited, it's not just about people.
No.
And I would even argue that it's places where people gather, where that is the focus, is very strong. But I've also
gather with certain intention.
Exactly.
To be fair, if we're talking about the divine light,
yeah, for sure,
the divine energy.
But even I've felt that same presence sitting. I know there's a particular lake near where I was born, and I remember sitting there one day and feeling that same. So in nature is what I'm saying as well. It can be. It's like that is the base reality of life, and it then gets sort of distorted or covered over or veiled. But there are places where that unveiling is very clear to be felt and seen.
Yeah, interesting. But I think even so, even nature unveiled, let's say, there are still places of relative spiritual power relative to other places.
Absolutely.
And they're out there. And one of the strongest ones that I did come in, and probably many people are aware of this particular place, Arunachala, which is in South India, which was where, and actually it was Ramana Maharshi's ashram itself. It was very hard to tell which one was emanating the power, whether it was, the mountain, or whether it was Ramana's interned, his presence was there. I love that. Ramana, when he was dying, Ramana was dying. I think he had cancer or something, and someone said, "Oh, Ramana, please don't go." And his answer was, "Why could I go? I'm here." He just understood himself to be the self, the omnipresent, always available self. So, but that was super. That's another super powerful place. And but it's why is it important? I mean, it's worth asking, eh?
Good question.
Well, because it probably something to do with outward signs of inner grace. And there's a quote I wanted to bring to this from Augustine, Saint Augustine, who was a father of the Christian Church, and I only came across it recently. But it spoke to this idea that we've talked about, that meditation, satsang, just inclination towards spiritual inquiry, self-inquiry, whatever practice one is engaged in or something like that, or even the vicinity of awakened beings, the inclination to hang around with... The
orientation towards... the divine
can be seen by if you're kind of caught up in a dualistic viewpoint, you see yourself as a person who's engaging in certain practices that cause higher states of consciousness, let's say, or greater divine presence, whatever you want to call it. But my contention is that no, these are symptoms actually.
I am in
of consciousness.
1,000% agreement.
Consciousness is rising, consciousness is stirring, evolving in its own nature. I mean, consciousness ultimately doesn't evolve as such. But
because if it's to do with I make effort and this happens, then it's not uprooting the basic premise of I.
Yes, I am not the body. I'm not the body mind.
Yeah.
But it was interesting to find that that idea reflected in the in through Augustine, and it's, and I'm sort of translating it in a sense to my own spiritual sort of framework, let's say. And he basically says about sacraments, and he said a sacrament is an outward visible sign of an inward invisible grace. So I'll say that sacrament is an outward visible sign of an inward invisible grace. So meditation, satsang,
the impulse, the desire
spiritual
to
impulse,
meditate,
sadhana in general, that which is the attempt to unite the soul with the divine,
and the devotion towards that as well in your life,
is an outward sign of something that's going on inside, not
shift.
the cause.
Yeah.
The outer doesn't cause the inner. The inner is what's stirring, what's transforming, what's changing, what's awakening.
Yeah.
And the outer then
reflected.
catches up and shouts.
Yeah.
So don't put the cart before the horse, basically.
Beautiful.
So, yeah, I find that, really pertinent, that we can talk about transmissions, and we often get it's easy to view it from a kind of a causal mechanistic way.
Yeah. I give you a transmission and it has an effect.
Right.
Now, on the surface level, it certainly looks that way. But at the heart of all of this, that comes from a dualistic viewpoint. And at the heart of all of this, there is no transmitter, no transmission, and no transmittee.
Yeah.
It is all just the play of life unfolding.
It's how the grace is showing up, how life is unfolding and unpacking. So it's kind of, when someone...
I just wanted to add a quote before you go on there, from Ramana Maharshi. The true darshan is when the seer and the seen merge into one, and there is no distinction between the observer and the observed. And to me, this speaks to transmission. The true transmission it's an attunement of that life that is happening. And we talk about transmitter and
giving a transmission and receiving and all that
is not my lived reality understanding of it. Now we talk about it in those terms, but it's
a conventional way to
exactly.
and in some ways you almost have to talk about it in conventional terms, and I use conventional in sort of technically here, like the two truths doctrine in Buddhism speaks about absolute truths and conventional truths,
or provisional.
Same kind of idea. That the conventional will say, I'm holding a mug of coffee. Absolute would say, the essence of all phenomena is empty. So there is no cup, there is no coffee. So, but try ordering that. In Starbucks.
Yes.
So I'd like an empty, non-conceptual, I don't know, drink of coffee, please. No, something like that. So conventionally speaking, the way to describe, something like giving a transmission, receiving a transmission, those are sort of conventional, and language is dualistic. So you have to speak in these terms. But ultimately, that conventional viewpoint yields.
It does.
To the recognition that it is simply consciousness unpacking, unfolding, presenting itself, displaying itself in a variety of ways.
Yep.
And
that consciousness has a felt energetic reverberation. I don't know if that's quite the right word, but has a movement of life, a vibration of life.
It has a palpable sense, and I think from a non-doing point of view, it's worth noting that that not to have a flat view of, let's say, of non-duality. Let's say where everything's equal, everything's flat. No, there's no clearly consciousness shows up with all sorts of frequencies, distinctions, multi-dimension differentiations, different qualities, tastes,
colors.
Yeah, colors, senses, all these different force fields interacting to give rise to a kind of a very, very rich, multi-dimensional reality that we call now.
Yeah.
It's not flat.
No, and there's, and this is something that's sort of come online more and more for me over the years, is the sensitivity to the different, and this is what we're talking about with presence, really, the sensitivity to those different vibrational fields of life.
Right.
And those veils that we were talking about just then, to me, is felt as different vibrations, let's say.
Right.
And I remember years ago, like, if someone would talk to me about vibrations, again, that was put in the category of woo by me for whatever reason. But actually, even science points to vibrations, in terms of hertz and things like this, of different particle vibrations of life.
I mean, look, from a scientific point of view, this is a vibrationary field of consciousness. I mean, the unified field is, there's no materialism here. There's just vibrations of fields. And all the fields converge on are expressions of a singular field. Yeah. And I would make the case that field is consciousness.
Yeah. And so the veils that veil someone from feeling that pure, let's call it higher vibration of presence, that's what it's experienced to me. Those veils, I would argue, are of a lower vibration, or
they're
heavier.
grosser, heavier.
They feel heavier, they feel denser, they feel thicker.
Yeah.
That's my experience now, and it wasn't always my experience, and it's something that's I can see as refining and refining and refining. But it's like, and so there's definitely a correlation of I guess I could describe it as I'm more able to feel those finer vibrations of life because I'm more attuned to those finer vibrations of life. That's probably how I would explain it if someone were to ask, well, why can some people feel present, that strength of that presence, and others not? And I would argue somewhere in that realm. That if you're attuned to it, you're aware of it, you're conscious of those finer vibrations of life. That's where you start to notice these things.
Yeah, I agree. And if you've spent years and decades inhabiting your own inner awareness and it becoming attuned to very subtle realms of being, then certain things kind of jump out.
They do.
That I haven't even got names for.
No, it's not. You can't describe it as in the realm of duality, words of things like sensations and this and that. The best words I can use are things like vibration or energetic fields or these kind of things.
Exactly.
And so you can start to try and chop it up in those ways, but it's a known. I'm struggling for words here. See, there we go. Talking about
palpable.
yeah.
If you're sensitive to it, it becomes palpable.
Yeah.
It's a reality. It's a reality, not a kind of a.
So those palpable energetics are seen and known in places, with people, with groups. Even
reading. I mean, I remember. In the last couple of years before, I had a big shift, I was I'd cottoned on to what was going on energetically when I was sitting, mostly online back then. I mean, I was still in big groups of meditators and I was doing my own thing. And I would, but I noticed that, and this was, I don't know, back in the 2010s, more and more non-dual teachers, for example, awakened teachers were offering something online, meeting
it was the start of that, really.
Yeah, it's the start of that, and it was all very low res at the time. But I remember noticing that I was feeling it. I was feeling that presence when I was sitting with them,
regardless of what they were saying.
Regardless of what they were saying, and also some weren't, and I've come to see, they weren't actually awake. Right,
yes,
because I was going, what's this one? He's saying all the right things, but I'm actually not. And
It's
then
the
I've
energy,
come to feel that actually they're not quite there. They're teaching good stuff, but they're not actually awakened to their nature. So, but I was using it, and I had a whole schedule, like, when this person was on, when that was, I just tune in, and I was using it on this basis, as I said earlier, to be around it. It felt like I was being meditated, and so I could really feel that the work was being done for me, on me, in me, when I was sitting, with these, sitting in this, what I would call the satsang field, or their presence, or their darshan, or whatever you.
And some of them would speak, and some of them would be in silence.
Yeah.
And you said some of them would actually be
Talk
speaking
shit.
kind of nonsense.
Yeah, I know. There's a couple of. I won't name names, but I remember sitting there going, "You're talking nonsense," but his presence was absolutely genuine, so it was fine by me. And I was thinking then, and sometimes it was like a really bad signal. I would have, it would be a recording, and of course we'd noticed this from the early days of sitting there and watching. They'd pull out like a Maharshi tape. If you go on a TM weekend retreat,
I had it at school as well.
Also, you had it at school. They'd pull out, Maharshi tape, and you'd watch it, and it would wash over you, and you'd feel that presence. And I don't think people realized how much work was being done.
The transmission.
By that. So it's like, well, where's the transmission? Because this wasn't Maharshi sitting there. This was a recording. So somehow, so I thought, well, it's not coming. So, trying to be scientific about it, well, it's not coming from him because he's not there.
It's not in the same realm of space time.
Yes.
That we, in a linear fashion, that the mind would like to believe it should be.
So where's the transmission coming from and going to? Well, it's not coming down the Wi-Fi, and it's certainly not traveling through time in the same way. So what's going on? And it became clear, this is my own enlivening, and so the outer then becomes this actually my own consciousness presenting itself and along correlating
in the seeming separate teacher or sage
exactly.
or guru or whatever, but it's an activation and attunement to that which lies beneath the veils of conditioning, that which is your very own self.
And in some ways it's the self saying you're onto something. Right? Here it's like,
look here,
like Ramana Maharshi, let this feeling guide you.
Yes. And it did, and that was such a beautiful thing for me to witness through you, because I don't think it took me quite a while after you to grok that. Only through you talking about that did I get what you were speaking of. Even though, again, I'd very much experienced it my whole life. I just didn't consciously put the two and two together. Right on. And you did. I remember that was earlier for you, that process of putting two and two together. Right. Yeah. And using it, because those last couple of years, that was a big part of the method, and actually one of the big reasons for going and living with in an ashram with a sage, an awakened being, and being just part of a group there who were basically, I looked at it as going, it didn't matter who it was, actually. It didn't matter as long as they were awake, because that was the level at which I was tuning into. Yeah, and you became, to speak to last podcast, you became singular in your attention. And it seemed the way to get the clarity, to burn away the mental densities that obscure one's self-recognition, was to be in the satsang field, day and night as much as possible, completely in that field. And it was like that, and it did, and it was instrumental, but also it was more to the point, it was symptomatic of the fact that I was on the edge. Exactly. There's the deeper truth in all of this. We could look at it as, we went there and that's what caused that But no,
No.
it was already the symptom.
It
The
was-
desire to even go and give up your whole life and sell all your possessions and go and live in an ashram
Yeah.
is already a symptom of that
It was
divine impulse of grace planted in the seed of the heart
Growing in the seed
and
of the heart, yeah.
blossoming.
It was the visible outward sign of a invisible inner grace.
There you go. Beautiful, Augustine.
And that was the reality of it.
Yeah.
Burning away. So, you know, and I think it's an important part of the message I would give to a seeker at a certain stage is come to see that it's not you striving for enlightenment or awakening or truth or whatever, however you want to call it, or union, or what did you call it?
Divine remembrance.
Lovely. Beautiful. It's that you are being inexorably and irresistibly called to that.
Yeah.
And your outward orientation is the very outward manifestation of that
everything
movement.
orientates around that eventually, and it might not even look that way to start with, but it is how life is orientating, and eventually you get to the sort of the heart of that and the fire of that orientation, and it becomes that singular compass point towards the divine.
Well, you talk about, don't you, when you're teaching or guiding or mentoring, however you want to call it, you talk about, you know, meeting people where they are, and sometimes people can't hear these ultimate truths. So you have to meet them where they are with one could say provisional kind of teachings to help them get to the next step, but you always introduce them ultimately, say, hey, we're here right now. Exactly. Your breadcrumbs are like, look, we're here, we're talking about this, and you know,
like you know, an example of that would be to give prescriptions, or to say, well, you know, if you meditate, or if you do this, or if you have transmissions, this will happen. Well, in the breadcrumbs of that, you have to see that there was no doer. It was just the symptom of consciousness arising and unfolding within you. Yeah,
awakening in its own nature, which is you. But you can't always hear that. But you give them that, even though they might not be able to grok it. Like, and for myself, I mean, if I was back in sort of say the mid 90s, when I was very much involved with, you know, meditation, living in a you know, community. A community, a TM, you know, retreat, and working there and doing all that, and totally dedicated to, you know, my own practice, and also understanding it through Maharshi's teachings, among others. But it's very much kind of one-pointed back then. I couldn't hear direct teachings at that point. No. I couldn't hear self-inquiry, non-duality, satsang. I couldn't have understood it in those terms.
No. Imagine if someone come to you and said, there's no free will, you're not doing any of this.
Well, actually, I kind of,
you're a bit
that was a big part of
my... to think back to a time where if someone had introduced you,
but the idea of who am I, and those kind of inquiries, and what's looking directly into the nature of what's arising in the present moment, and is there a self in here, right? Is there a person? I wasn't ready for those kind of for those questions or answers.
No. And this is where I come down to with all of it, and it's not. I didn't used to have this viewpoint, but it's where I have come to at this moment anyway, is to really honor and recognize that wherever we find ourselves is entirely correct for our path. It is our path.
Yeah.
And so even if it is provisional teachings, or even if it is practices that make you sort of almost seem like they reinforce a doing or a doer, that actually all practices, all teachings, all paths lead to the same recognition eventually. And so we have to honor where we find ourselves, while hopefully not losing sight of what is being pointed to ultimately, which is our divine nature.
Yeah. And so what I was going to say about the breadcrumbs thing, at a certain point in my path, the breadcrumbs I was following, it was the energetic footprint of awakened beings.
Beautiful.
And I was just using that to get deeper, further, richer, uncovering. I could feel the work. I was still meditating. I was still engaging in practice, quotes.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I was just basking in the satsang field.
Which is a beautiful one because it's non-conceptual. Like, so there's not much for the mind to grasp hold of there. You know, and the problem with too many conceptual teachings is the mind can grasp hold too tightly and sort of calcify there. But when there's nothing for the mind to hold on to, like, for instance, just the energetic pull that you're speaking of there, it's a very innocent sort of path, let's say, an innocent pathway forward, because it's a felt non-conceptual orientation.
Well, what did Maharshi used to call the passage of meditation on the inward stroke? It was the path of increasing charm.
Yeah.
And so this was very much that. There was an unmistakable sense of presence, bliss, peace, palpable. You know, it wasn't just a quietening of the mind. It was a sort of an enlivening of a felt sense of peace and bliss.
That starts out with a quietening of the mind often.
Right, it's part and parcel
because
of it.
You don't notice that bliss unless the mind has sufficiently quietened down, I would argue.
Maybe, but you know, sometimes I just go in there, you just feel it. It's felt. It's on some sort of.
But that's what I mean. It's
level.
Like the mind.
Even when the mind was kind of busy sometimes. It you know, I'm not sure, right?
Yeah,
you know,
I get what
that's
saying,
necessarily one or the other. Although there seems to come a quietening of the mind that comes along with it.
I think that, I guess that's what I'm pointing to, is naturally the quietening of the mind is part of the process as well.
But you know, just following that, and that it's
all of this to say, I guess, that if one attunes themselves to that possibility, or that opens, let's not use the word attunes here, let's say opens themselves up to that possibility of presence in itself being a guiding light,
right,
and that presence can be known and felt. And the way I would always describe it is like the volume gets turned up in certain circumstances, let's say transmissions, or sitting in a church and on a random island in Wales, or you know, if one opens themselves up to that possibility, you start to begin to see the validity and the truth of that in your life. And that actually, it's very intimate to all of us. We just don't value it or recognize it.
Well, we're busy. Back to your point about your mind. You're right. You know, if a mind is constantly occupied on the world, outer things, sensory experience, conceptions, the constant train of thought. If your attention is just always on there, the quietness, the subtlety of that energetic footprint, that presence is missed. But
you know, like I say this to some people, is like, we all know this presence. Maybe not conceptually how we're talking about it here, but we all know it. You walk into a room and there's someone standing in the corner and you feel it. Both, you might
positive
even feel it in a
negative,
negative sense here. You feel that sort of someone's, you know, really struggling with life or going through something difficult, and you feel the presence, the energetic footprint, the energetic vibration of that person standing there. You know nothing about them. You don't know what's going on in their life. You've never met them, but you feel it. And most people, if you describe that to them, they would go, oh yeah, I've had that happen to me. But they wouldn't attribute it with a pervading energetic field to life. No. Because that's not how they see life. And so that's how I would sort of introduce or reveal or show that this is actually something you're much more intimate with than you realize. You just don't realize what it is you're intimate with.
And I would say that you'll see it when it's ready. When you're ready. And because I years back, before I really had a meaningful meditation practice, I was still very much a kind of a seeker and a truth seeker. And I went to stay at a Buddhist monastery in England. I can't remember. Chithurst was the name.
Yeah.
Chithurst. And it was a Theravada Buddhist monastery, and the first time I'd really gone and stayed anywhere like that. And I mean, it was a beautiful, it was an old sort of, I don't know, country house kind of thing. Lots of land floating around. I'm sure there's some deer running around the back, and there's little meditation huts on the land. I remember walking around, and there was, just a little hut. You could just, with like a rattan mat, and you could, people would go and spend a few days there or whatever. So, I was unschooled in what I was, where I was, and I was struggling with meditation, I remember.
You didn't have
I didn't have a specific technique, and so a lot of my approach back then, it was sit down and force yourself and concentrate and hold fast and don't move, and that somehow I was very, very kind of strange.
But that is actually how meditation starts for a lot of people.
Yeah, it was. I hadn't found it yet. But I was there, and so all I could think was complain about...
It's the person meditating at that point. I am meditating.
Yeah. I was going to sort of complain about my back and, trying to sit there. And anyway, but it was really, it was a beautiful place. And the monks were all kind of interesting. And they're all in there in their sort of orangey sort of robes, orangey brown, I think. And, it was an insight. It was an insight into that way of life. But I remember not feeling that I was getting much out of what was being said, or anyone in particular that was anyone in particular sort of stood out to me, or I wasn't really feeling very
wasn't resonating
with much there. But to this day, I remember one guy, and he was just the most normal guy. And if you're out there, Steve Stevenson, who went to Chithurst Buddhist Monastery back in the early 90s, thanks. Because there was just a guy who was staying there like me. There was a handful of lay people who were coming, staying for a few days or a week or more. Mm-hmm. And I remember being out in the back one day, doing my chopping wood, as you do, chopping some wood, and we just have conversations. We were just chatting away, and he struck me. He had something I couldn't put my finger on, some sort of quiet spiritual presence, even though he was like the most regular guy, just didn't know, you wouldn't get it. But I remember something was being communicated on an energetic level that I felt, oh, you got something that I'm looking for, and I couldn't figure out what it was. Funnily enough, and this isn't by no means an endorsement, but go and fill your boots, whatever. He talked about he was a TM meditator.
So that was the first time you'd been introduced to the
I
idea
might have
of TM.
heard about it beforehand, but not really.
I see.
Vaguely. But he said, oh, TM, okay, whatever. And because I was going, oh my God, I can't meditate. It's just pain and I'm just distracted. And I said, what do you do? He said, well, I do TM. I said, okay, whatever. So he did it. And it was funny. It was actually probably 2-3 years later I went and learned that. And the value of it is its simplicity and its effectiveness for me. It was immediate, that kind of simplicity. But more than the technique or whatever was the fact that he had some sort of spiritual presence that I became aware of.
Right.
And that happened again later. That happened again with a friend of mine who had, picked up a meditation practice. And I said, what have you been doing? And he said, oh, I've, learned to meditate properly. I went, okay. I mean, not the only game in town, but somehow it was a breadcrumb. And so looking back throughout, looking back all these years later, I saw these breadcrumbs that, I resonated with that. And because on the back of that feeling I went, okay, something there.
Yeah, and it's not a feeling that is manufactured. It's something. It's like a mystery of life revealing itself to you. It's like you're not going out there looking for it. It's something that finds you, that comes over you. That sense of that.
And it wasn't just intuitive in the sense of a yes. It was a felt presence.
Yeah.
Now, just so it doesn't look like I'm actually completely endorsing a particular point, it was that same sense of palpable presence of a spiritual thing that actually led me out of that particular movement of TM and that practice, led me on further on. So I found it in richer, more stronger, palpable terms.
Concentrations.
And again, it was moving me towards what? Towards the point at which you really, truly in yourself, your light is lit.
Yeah.
It's always lit anyway, but you
Everything
realize that
presence.
everything becomes presence then, and you yourself recognize yourself as that light.
It's interesting because like this reminds me of a big shift that happened for me, and it's very hard to describe this, but I'm going to attempt to describe it. So prior to self-realization, what became obvious was feeling other people's presence, right?
Right.
So you could feel the uncovering or the unveiling that had occurred in individuals.
Right.
Post self-realization, the whole thing sort of flipped for me energetically. So instead of now going, ooh, that one over there they've got a strong presence to them. Now what flipped was everything is that presence, and what I'm noticing now is the density or the veils.
Yeah.
And that was a surprise to me, like a really big surprise.
Yeah.
Like that was, no one had ever spoken about that. No one, I'd never heard that from anyone. And so it was just a noticing of my own recognition of the difference there that went,
It used to be, I would recognize the presence as like a positive,
yes,
almost an aberration to the normal state of affairs.
Exactly.
But now
everything is that presence,
and you're noticing the veiling. You're noticing the things that obscure that.
Exactly.
Those embodied energies,
densities. Those again, lower vibration. It's not a judgment of higher or lower.
I think density is good. Mental densities.
Yeah, there you go. It's less loaded, loaded, less judgmental seeming, because it's not a judgment. It's just a description of how it's felt.
Yeah.
And so, that flip was very, very interesting to me. So I guess what it correlates is we are all that divine nature, but where there is an occlusion to that, there is a density or a veil. I would call it the way I would describe it, like fabric veiled over a light bulb almost. Yeah. And so that's what becomes obvious to me now when I sit with someone or I'm past someone in the street even, is you can feel the level of density or veiling of that presence that they don't recognize their own presence. They don't recognize their own nature. Yeah.
And it's beautiful. I think the analogy that comes to my mind regarding this, like I take photographs. I'm a photographer on the sly, and
not so sly anymore then.
Well, yeah, okay. Well, it's a hobby. But if you ever used photography or photograph software, I don't know, Lightroom or Photoshop or whatever, and you put like a photograph on there as a layer, there's one slider called opacity, and basically it's say you put a big dark grey image up there, or color or anything like that. I mean, this is not just photography, but computer imaging. And there's an opacity slide, which means it's like on one end it's completely opaque. It's dense. It's you
Solid,
can't
yeah.
see through it. Solid, dark, whatever. Then you slide that down, and it's like a thick mist, and then it goes thinner and thinner and thinner, and right at the bottom is complete transparency.
Yeah.
And it's like that. It's almost like ignorance, let's say, or embodied. These things that
belief in the
obscure
material as
belief in the
well.
material, but it has its energetic correlate, right?
absolutely.
These ideas, these beliefs, these false notions, you'd call them in Buddhism, are like they have their energetic correlates.
Yeah.
So these ideas are almost like a result of the density,
conditioned belief
density of
or concept
that's underneath it, and so it's like awakening, let's say, or coming into clarity. We've talked about the word clarity is
the
such a beautiful word
for me that's so on point for all of this.
And in Sanskrit it's vidya, and actually ignorance is avidya, which is non-clarity. It's just that simple.
And that's what awakening to me is, clarity.
So it's about
it's one way of describing it.
Yeah, well, that's it. And enlightenment is described as vidya.
Yeah.
And so what is that? Just clarity. So you turn that slider down, you thin out these densities, and it's like the mist of the morning mist over the hills. As the sun rises, just burns away. It's complete transparency. It's just you see the world exactly as it is without obstruction, and so but it's not just a case of when you turn that slider down, you thinned out these densities, eliminated the false notions and the energetic correlates to that. Once it's clear, it's not just that it's gone away, it's radiant. Being is radiant. Consciousness is radiant. It's not just it's not flat. It's
not
radiant awareness, and that's something to do with these where this radiance shows up is someone who's cleared their densities, a place that somehow is clearer, has broken through, just a higher density of spiritual.
I think it's really fascinating that the old iconographies of Christianity show this halos around saints' heads.
Saints and whatnot.
Because to me that is depicting the shining light. I mean, that's why I call it divine light transmission. Divine light, quite literally, the divine light transmitting or emanating, radiating. Yeah, it is. There is, and actually, it's funny because I've been doing this. We've both been doing this for a number of years now. But from my own personal experience, started out not with. It was a lot based on faith and seeing the results of it rather than actual, because I guess early doors, my sensitivity to this energy, although was very much there, wasn't developed in the way it is now, I would say. And so, like, for instance, now there's actually a visual seeing of that energy. There's a very palpable, very strong feeling of it, a very specific feeling of it as well. That wasn't there or wasn't developed or wasn't as sensitive at the beginning of all of this. So it's just, to me, it's so just
even then, even and so all right. So let's talk a little bit about the activity of transmitting. As distinct from the sort of ambient.
Yeah, so I would describe the difference. There's an informal transmission, which is what we've currently been talking about.
It's a sort of an ambient,
which is darshan presence. The ambient underlying vibration of the field of the divine. It has a presence to it. Has an ambience. We are. I really feel that we are all transmitting, whether we're recognizing that and attuned to that or not. We are all transmitting. Life is a transmission. Life is an energetic vibration. Now, what I think we're moving into talking about right now is not the informal transmission of that ambient presence.
Yes,
but actually,
which I was so attuned to. It was just simply by virtue of their awakened being that you could pick up on it.
Yeah, as an unveiled being. That ambient transmission, that ambient presence is palpable for
Yeah.
those that are sensitive to that.
Yes.
Or
And it's happening anyway, whether you're sensitive to it or not. It's always
whether you're conscious of that and
because we are it.
focused on that. Yeah, it and this is why you sit in meditation next to someone who knows their nature, let's say more. You might find that meditation is easier next to that person. Right. But here we move over to talking about formal transmission, what I would call formal transmission. Right. And that is the same principle, but in addition to that ambient presence, that ambient transmission, there is knowledge of that field and therefore intention and attention that is applied in that field, let's say.
And directed, in a sense.
And that's how I see transmissions. And again, on the surface level, we talk about it in terms of a doing. We talk about it in terms of application and
conventionally, that's how it's
and all of
done
that.
and experienced.
Yeah, but I don't want to lose sight of the recognition that all of this is happening.
We'll leave those breadcrumbs, leaving to
So I think that's important to just put that in there right now to say I know we're talking about direction and intention and attention, but it's all nested within the recognition of the singular non-dual arisings of life,
non-doing.
Yeah, exactly. So we don't need to
put that to the side.
So speaking in terms of the relative experience of transmissions and formal transmissions, there's to give a transmission is for me starts with an intention and an attention, a turning up the volume that happens when one purposefully and consciously turns the attention to that level of life. That's how it's experienced for me anyway.
Well, it's that idea, isn't it? And I can't remember who said it first, that which we give attention to grows. It's a function of consciousness that you pay attention to something and it tends to just grow on its own terms. And I think there is that not many, I think more and more I see more and more since it became such a distinct part of my own path. Again, once you pay attention to something, the incidence of it seems to show up in lots of different places. I see there's more attention now on spiritual transmission, a Shakti, and however you want to.
I think it's the natural
divine
unfoldment.
Light. I think we're talking about more or less the same thing. It's about where the, let's say, quotes, everything's in quotes, where the transmitter comes from, and if
you can be a clearer conduit or channel of that energy. Again, we're talking about veils here. If there's more veils there, and you can be awake, but there's still be veils there. That to me, that's very clear that's possible. I've seen it. I've seen it myself. I've seen it in other people. It's very possible to have some veils still there.
Of course,
or densities still there. So to me, the effectiveness of that transmission comes down to the clarity of that conduit, or that channel. And what I've noticed in my own process of transmission is the more I give my personal self over for the transmission, as in I Imogen experience, step aside, and it's almost like a dropping into that samadhi of union. This is when the clearer conduit is really taking over.
The upsurge happens.
Turning up the volume. And transmitting a bit like a radio or an amplifier. You're amplifying that underlying energy of life, and what is happening again on the relative level, that the one that is sitting with that transmitter is attuning to that amplified energy. So the way I've described it is a little bit like I sing a C note and you're able to match that C note in your voice and sing that C note yourself.
Yeah.
It's not that you can't sing a C note yourself. You absolutely can. But having the guidance of or a reference point, let's say, of someone else singing that C note, it sure makes it easier.
Yeah. And of course, from the point of the one who's hearing, the one who's giving the transmission is themselves an appearance in your consciousness.
Yeah.
So there is no other here. It's your consciousness appearing in the so-called outer, awakening. What I like, there was a great quote someone said, all sages are alarm clocks, right? Something like that, saying wake up. It's your own being showing up as a teacher, a guide, a mentor, a transmitter, whatever, saying that wake up.
Yeah.
It's all about you in the end of the day. It's all about your enlivening, awakening, clearing your own light. I mean, that was the big shift for me. I realized that at a certain point I was chasing, well, as I say, I was hanging out with as many sages and many awakened beings as I could find online and off, because I could feel what they almost in like they were delivering some energetic thing. But then ultimately it just dawned as a function of awakening that this was always mine. This was always my own light awakening. So I don't need anyone out of myself. I am a light into myself. That's what Osho said, be a light into yourself.
Yeah.
But until you're a light to yourself, and I always said this, I'm not a big fan of people who, big fans like that. It's not my preferred way to get too devoted to an awakened individual as such. Whether there's a guru or a sage or whatever.
There's a lot of pitfalls in that.
There's a lot of danger stuff, but you can use them.
Yeah.
Use them. That was mine. I was headed for the truth. I didn't fall into I'm grateful I didn't fall into the trap of getting too caught up in any one person being the unique embodiment of truth.
And the only
There's
way.
Danger in that stuff. So but use them. Yeah. Get really close. And you know what? If they're sincere, if these teachers or these mentors, these sages, whatever, if they're genuine, they'd be like, too right.
Yeah.
Use me up.
Yeah.
And don't even say I don't need you to appreciate, say thank you, anything like that. I'm just really happy that you're owning your own reality. Use me completely.
Yeah. And when I cease to be of use, that's totally fine.
And so if you feel any tendrils coming off someone like that, move off. Or continue to use it, but don't fall for it. Find your own, use people, teachings
as a jumping off point,
as
and
a jumping off point, as a mirror. Use them as instrumental.
Yeah.
Because if they're really,
but don't ever mistake that they have something you don't. They may mirror back something that you don't see in yourself. Yes.
Yeah.
But awakening is always about the self-discovery.
It's an inside job.
Yeah. It's not about going out there and getting something you don't have.
So I was really grateful I didn't get caught up in that kind of whole. There's anything desperately wrong with being a devotee, but there's a lot of pitfalls. Aim for truth. The truth of your own being, ultimately. And so I was grateful I didn't get too caught up in that. And so the end point of my seeing, believing, conceiving that the light that I was aware of was kind of coming from them in some way, realized no, it was around them, it was activating in me, and then ultimately, it's just me, me in the big big self, not me, Martyn self. It's here, it's this, all of it
never
is this,
not.
actually never not here.
Yeah. And it's funny, I just want to touch back on, I know we're sort of going back onto a different topic here, but it feels relevant somehow. where just touching on places of contemplation, churches,
places of spiritual power,
even just places, places on earth. For me, that is felt stronger because these are gathering places where people are looking to something higher than them, their own personal small self. And so that's why, to me, there is a concentration or readiness of that presence in the bricks and mortar of these places often, because it's like where our attention is turned, the direction of our attention is turned towards our divine nature, our light. It's more readily available, it's more readily felt, and I think that can be what's the word? Imbued in the literal physicality of a space as well.
Of course, it begs the question, and maybe you don't even need to give it an answer. It's a correlation, let's say. Are these spiritual power places drawing people in to concentrate bring their focus and devotion to the inner experience, or are people actually charging up?
Yeah, and I don't think we need to know the answer to that.
I think it's both and.
Yeah. But I think there is, for me, I don't know what the words. It's not quite sadness. It's a shame, though. It's a shame that we're losing those places.
Well, I mean, we've touched on this before. I mean, it's a long time coming. I mean, it's a function of secular materialism, modernism, where, don't get me wrong, lots of benefits, but all the focus is outward.
Yeah.
And all the churches are shutting down, and all the the places of worship,
the places of contemplation, the places of where we are drawn to attend to something higher than the small mind, body, egoic self, where the attention is
beyond ourselves,
exactly,
something higher, something bigger, something transcendent too.
And I think that we're losing that in the heart of our communities, certainly here in the UK, in the West. And it's interesting, we've spent a lot of our time moving around quite a lot in our lives. We're pretty nomadic, and we're always drawn wherever we go to these places, to these sort of whatever denomination they might be. We're drawn to these places because we're drawn to that ourselves.
Yeah.
And I just think it's a shame. I get why, because the excesses of religion has its own problems. But I think it's a shame that we're losing that focus in our culture, in our history.
Well, we were somewhere and I think it was Nottingham. We were doing a house sitting in Nottingham, I think, or it wasn't Edwin Stowe, something like that. It's right on the edge of Sherwood Forest,
right within walking distance of the big famous
the big 500-year-old
tree.
We would we really beautiful. But there's a church there, and the idea was that they said that so the story goes, this is where Robin married Marion. This was
just a little church,
just a little local church, Edwinstowe. It was Edwinstowe.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
And so we were there, and we popped in, and it was beautiful, and it was old, and it was had some presence to it. And we sat, and as we usually do, we'll just sit in the day the church is open. Yeah. Because it's just nice to find a spot that's out of the marketplace somehow.
Yeah.
Anyway, we sat there, but my overwhelming feeling was, as we sat there quietly, as we do, we'll sit down for a little bit, we'll sit quietly, silent, abidance, meditation, whatever. But what struck me was how the place felt more like a museum than it did an actual living place of worship, reflection, contemplation. It was just, it was set up. Oh, this is where this happened, and this is where this happened. It wasn't like you didn't. It, even though I felt the hallowed nature of it, hallowed nature.
Yeah, no.
But it wasn't set up. The posters and the signposts were all about the historical nature of it, rather than this is a place of where you can quietly commune with your own nature, the divine nature, whatever you're
with God,
with life. And so again, it was a symptom for me that, oh gosh, this whole thing is disappearing. Our tradition,
and our connection to the divine.
Yeah, because
our lived as a society, our lived sort of active connection. A connection suggests two, so I don't really like that word, but I guess remembrance of our divine nature.
Yeah. And so, it'd be interesting to see whether we'll just continue on this sort of what's the word? Godless, secularization, materialism. As we keep going, whether we'll continue on down that line, or whether there is some kind of remembrance that starts to emerge, and at a kind of a more grassroots level, whether people will turn within.
Yeah.
Again.
I hope
I mean, some do. Many do.
I see that.
But as a culture, not so much.
Well, I don't know. I've spoken about this with you many times of my both despair at the current situation, but also my great hope and my great feeling of optimism as well.
This is God's plan, the plan of or
the green shoots of like actually this is just part of the process. I see it with the awakening process on the individual, and I see it in the cultural setting as well. I see part of the let's talk on just the individual level, and you can apply it to the broader societal level, cultural level. But on an individual level, when awakening is taking hold, it gets pretty messy at a certain point, as in it gets pretty divisive. Things start to crack open and break apart, and there's a lot of
structures
confusion,
fall apart,
and it gets really messy at a certain point. Like really,
it's true.
Like all the dark crap starts to come to the surface. That is part of the awakening process, as I see it.
Yeah,
it's unavoidable that all of your shadow and all of your ego and all of your sort of personal issues and traumas and conditioning and beliefs and all of that has to come up to the surface, and there's a lot of contradiction and confusion in that. There's a lot of paradoxes in that, and so you could apply it to what I
society
see
writ large
is going on right now. We're going through a pretty messy phase. That's pretty obvious to anyone who cares to look. There's a lot of divisiveness, a lot of sort of mess going on right now, and this is where I come in with my optimism, maybe naive optimism, but and I'm not talking about timescales here. I'm not, because I think we have a very human view of timescales that I think is limited, but generally speaking, that is part of the awakening process, to get down in the muck and the mud of it all.
It's part of the spiritual evolution,
to have things starting to break apart and dissolve and break down, and we see that as a negative thing, as if we're going backwards, but I don't have the same view, having gone through the awakening process. I don't see it the same way. I don't see that this is a bad thing. I see that it's a pretty horrible thing to live through. Yes. Absolutely. I'm not, and I wouldn't, it's not something I wish upon anyone in the lived experience of it. You don't wish that upon anyone. But I don't see it as a bad thing in terms of the grander scheme of it, the greater process of it. And I guess there's where my optimism comes from. Is I see the green shoots of what this leads to, not the process that we're in, and so to look at that in the individual process of awakening. Awakening is a destructive process. It destroys that which you're not.
Well, that's why. I mean, we talked a little bit last week about Kali Ma, you know, and that your experience of and understanding of where you're.
No, we didn't speak about that last week. We spoke about that on a podcast, which has
The one that's
got
not going out?
deleted.
Oh, okay, okay. Fair enough. Anyway, it's true, but you okay? So paraphrase. Anyway, we'll talk about the energy of Kali Ma. I think originally when we were doing transmissions, that was the sense of what was behind behind the sort of the transmission, the awakening transmission that we were sort of schooled in. And I get it. I get because from an energetic level, understanding what Kali Ma is about as a deity.
Mm-hmm.
Or as not separate from self, or just again,
all arising
nothing
within,
is all arising. Structures of intelligence within the self, sure. So Kali Ma as that, but her nature is it's in her fierce nature, let's say, and what a lot of people might see fierce grace is, she's this multi-armed being. Just like I think she got like a dark face, her tongue's out. She's skulls and swords and just corpses all around, and it's like, whoa, that's a bit strong. Yeah. But it's what Kali is about is all those corpses. They're demons, and they're demons of the ego and the self, and they're false, the delusion. That it's a messy business. Yeah. But she destroys that which you're not. Yeah. That's the bottom line of it. She just that energy and that's
that which you are can't be destroyed.
Exactly.
And so the only fear of what gets destroyed is the fear of that which is false to begin with anyway.
So in some ways, she's a great emblem of the awakening process, because it does get messy and it does get bloody sometimes. And some don't mind. Some just wake up very sweetly and have no problems.
There's no rules to how that can look.
But if you've got a lot of
vast majority, there's a time within the process, and for some that's short, and for some that's a long time, whereby things, particularly if you've got a lot of unprocessed, unmet stuff in your system. Yeah.
And if you've built structures in the world, and I mean there's jobs, lives, relationships, all this stuff, if that's built on a strong ego, when the ego starts to lose its power, you look at that, as the true self starts to kind of come into its own light, that stuff's just not. And so that's the destructive part, because in the light of your own true self, so much of the structures and the things that you've built up around are revealed to be untrue, and they've got to go. So yeah. Anyway, I don't know why we got on that, but I think the idea that enlightenment is awakening is a destructive process.
But it's destroying, again, we talk about it in terms of densities, and we talk about presence here and that light of being. So it's a destructive part of that density of those lower vibrations, or the heavier energetic frequencies or dimensions. Yeah. That's what it's destructive of, and what it reveals is the light of being. Yeah. So it's not something to be afraid of, but it is something that can get pretty dicey. But in the middle
of there, where you don't know what the hell's going on, and the tendency maybe is to hold on to those things that are being taken away.
Yeah.
Wouldn't they need to?
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's good. Why don't we
stop for today?
Any final thoughts?
Just to say that, and I think I already said it, but just to say to people who may be wondering and questioning because of this conversation about presence, to have an open heart and to trust your felt experience of life more than your conceptual ideas of life. Let yourself be opened by that felt experience of presence. be drawn by the charm of that. And you'll notice that actually you already had noticed this in your life. You just weren't actively aware of it, maybe. And that the more attention is drawn to that level of life, the more available and possible it is to experience life in energetic terms, not in just material terms. So it's something that is activated and cultivated and noticed and remembered.
And symptomatic.
Well, yes, all of it's symptomatic. All of this is symptomatic. But just to draw the possibility to your attention. And maybe listening to this is a symptom of that already awakening in your life. To allow the hypothesis into your heart that life isn't quite as solid as you think it is, and that it is actually one unbounded, energetic field of experiencing. And that energetic field, we are that energetic field, we are that light.
Beautiful. Okay.
Okay.
Well, thanks for listening.
Thank you, everyone. See you again.
See you next time.